Hello, welcome to the OLM Working Group meeting. Today is Thursday, May 6th. On the agenda, we have several items. The first one is regarding DEPI, a new OLM V2 API from Evan. Evan, please go ahead.
Thanks. Here, let me share my screen, find the right window here. Oh yeah, can we see the presentation?
Hey, Evan, I think your mic is low volume. Could you turn it up a bit?
Yeah, is that better?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we, I guess really early in the year, we talked about a bunch of the V2 API plans and where we were thinking we'd go. And then a couple of working group meetings ago, we looked at the RUCPAC proposal, which is sort of the base layer. And so this is going over a doc that's been out for a while, but I turned it into a presentation just to kind of give folks time to digest it and think of any feedback that they have. So the next layer up, we're calling DEPI, at least for now. And it's essentially the thing that would replace the sort of subscription and install plan part of what we have today. So it's the workflow that lets the users say, here's what I want, trigger the dependency resolution, and output the bundles at the other side. So I thought it'd be good to just quickly refresh the RUCPAC part, which is the lower layer. We were proposing there's a bundle API that's sort of our image concept, our generalization of an image, and an instance API that's sort of our generalization of the pod concept, like make the content from the bundle available on the cluster. And then we talked about how we want to be able to support different types of bundles. And so we're going to take a strategy similar to how things in Kube and other things in Kubernetes do, like persistent volumes, and I guess the gateway APIs now. And we'll introduce a provisioner and a provisioner class pattern. So the provisioners are controllers that know about particular types of bundles. And then provisioner classes are how you configure the provisioners to interact with the bundles. And then I guess another key point from the RUCPAC proposal is the ability to have like a flexible approval plugin workflow so that we can deal with different ways that it might be different workflows for approving content before it gets applied to a cluster. So DEPI is the next step up. So we're still talking about OLM catalogs at this point. So if you remember the declarative index configuration, we're talking about catalogs in that format. So it's an image that contains a list of references to bundles, basically. So DEPI will read that data from catalogs. It'll take user input, kind of like we do today via the subscription API. And it will result in a set of bundles that need to be unpacked and applied. And that will be handed off to RUCPAC versus what we do today, which is the install plans directly apply content. One of the interesting things about the way we're looking at doing this layer is having DEPI itself be a RUCPAC plugin. So DEPI, we to support different types of content, we have different types of bundles. So we'd introduce a type of bundle that represents the output of a dependency resolution run. And so we'll call that a resolve set bundle. We'll provide a provisioner for it, so it gets its own provisioner class, gets its own approval plugins. I would say that the approval workflow is like one of the main motivations behind why it's useful to represent the output of resolution as a bundle. And then we can also, we're not restricted to just making it a plugin. We can also provide an API over top of it. And then I think we've also discussed the need for maybe some non-Kubernetes based, more interactive API to query about the data in the catalogs. And so that's for things like guess like provisional queries, finding out what's available in a catalog, finding out what would happen if you did decide to specify some certain constraints. Also maybe make it useful outside of the Kubernetes context. Like if you're running a CLI tool and you have some catalog data, but you don't have a Kube API server, make the resolver available to those contexts as well. So no proposal in this slideshow about an interactive API, other than that it would be probably useful to have one. Trying to get, there we go. So here's just a straw man example of what a resolve set bundle might look like. So these are our RuckPack APIs. We've defined a DEPI specific provisioner class for our type. And if you remember from the RuckPack proposal, we allowed for local content that could mount data from a volume. So the idea is that the resolver would output some content into a config map with the stuff it picked. And then the provisioner takes that and mounts it in a way that can be unpacked by RuckPack, or I guess in this case by the provisioner. So an example of some of the content of a resolve set, this would be the output from dependency resolution. It's just an entry that looks a lot like our, or is exactly, I guess, our declarative index config format. I think, I'm not sure if it's in here. I think we identify at least a couple cases where it might be useful for the resolver to add in some properties to sort of record why it made certain decisions. I don't think I have that in the example here, and I'm forgetting specific cases for that, but I guess the point is this doesn't have to be exactly the content that was the input. You know, this is the output of the resolution, not the input. And then here's sort of a straw man for what options we might support for the resolve set type bundle provisioner class. Different approval modes that would configure the approval plugin for these types of bundles. You know, these are just copied from the regular bundles, which are allow all denial and the Android style, where we just check that the permissions haven't expanded. And then this is the configuration that would let us map the type of bundle in the resolve set. So this class here corresponds to when we see a declarative index config with a particular schema, what type of bundle should we stamp out for DEPI to unpack? So this is saying whenever I see an OLM bundle in the resolve set bundle, the resolve set provisioner will stamp out a new bundle, but with the class OLM.bundle. And that goes back into the original OLM provisioner, knows how to unpack a operator bundle and cluster. And you can see how that would let us extend to other types of content. So resolve set bundles are output of the resolver. RuckPack knows how to instantiate these types of bundles, and that results in the creation of other regular bundles. So we have a bundle that triggers the creation of other bundles just via the normal RuckPack APIs. And then another layer up, how do we tell the resolver what we want? We're again copying the class pattern. So we have an input API and an input class API. The input API specifies a class that sets some properties of how the input is interpreted. And then this is just a list of constraints that we give to the resolver. So this is more tailored towards the way the resolver thinks about things rather than the way an end user might think about what it means to install a thing. So we're leaving open the possibility of layers above this, but this puts it in the form that the resolver understands. So this would be an example of a constraint that pretty much makes it work like a subscription, right? I'm looking for an operator in a catalog, and I need the things that you find to match name, namespace, package, and channel. But we can also get more specific, and this is where we start to diverge from what we can do today, because we don't have a great way to specify arbitrary constraints that the resolver can read, even though the resolver can understand relatively arbitrary constraints today. So you can say, I want a package of a particular version. if you want to, lock to a particular thing and avoid updates. If you want to lock by name instead of by version, or you want a specific range of versions, this would let you get updates, but it would only let you get updates within the range that you specified. And then we've talked about potentially storing some of our data in Rego, which would let you basically give arbitrary queries to the resolver. So this would be another way to specify a constraint that's only install things that are compatible with a particular version of OCP in this case. Status, we have, I think this is still very much up for discussion and debate. All of this is really, but it's variously useful to be able to see what things match the constraints that have been input, whether or not that satisfies all constraints, because there could be other instances of input objects that make selections not match. But this would let you potentially find out more about what the resolver is doing, what it's looking at, what it's ruling out, and what it's picking. And yeah, just information about the process. I think that's pretty much the gist. Is an example of the input class API, different ideas of things that we might want to do, like do a dry run or trace the installation and show a lot more data about it, or just apply a constraint to everything. So this would be like a global constraint that I could apply that would be any input class that uses this type gets this constraint added, and that prevents me from installing anything that doesn't run on Kube 120 or up. So that's pretty much the idea. I think there's a little more detail in some of the docs that we've shared before. But this is kind of how we take all the work that we've done in the declarative index config and with the RuckPack stuff and with the resolver that we have, and expose more of it in a way that is flexible and extensible and hopefully maintainable over time. That's pretty much all I had. So if you had any questions, or if we just want to stop and ruminate on that for another 2 weeks and come back and discuss it, that's fine too.
So it looks like this is replacing what you were previously calling Depster in your other strawman API that you had, or your document you had a few months ago.
Yes, this is exactly Depster. I renamed it because Ben, who should be on the call, I think, has another project called Depster, and so I don't want to make it confusing.
So are you folding this information back into that document? I haven't looked at it for a few weeks.
Yeah, the latest like big document has been updated to say Depi and all that, and that's really the only change. All of the stuff I'm showing here is pretty much copied and pasted from the document.
Okay, yeah, it looks familiar.
Yeah, I had a question about the resolve set bundles. I think treating the sort of the installables as a set makes a lot of sense. One of the problems we have in OLM today is that we treat sort of operators in a namespace as a set, and if one has a manual approval mode, for example, or rather, if several have manual approval modes and one gets approved, then they all get approved. So I'm wondering with this resolve set bundle, if that problem is, if we get that level of granularity that we no longer run into that type of issue.
We could use this to avoid that type of problem, but like one of the problems is how do we divvy up the set of things that we put into a resolve set bundle, and that is kind of been hand waved away in the APIs because it doesn't really show up in the APIs. But if I'm given a set of inputs, how do I, like, how many resolve set bundles do I generate, and how do I divide them up in a way that makes the most sense? So today, they're not divided up, right? OLM just combines them all together and says, maybe these are not all related now, but we're going to treat them as a set because they could be all related in the future after updates, and we have no way of knowing. And so I think I think that behavior we probably want to change because I think that's a source of confusion. But it's also potentially something that would be configurable via the input class, for example. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think the high configurability of this new design is very desirable. It seems really extendable. Okay, does anyone else have any questions or comments on this? I think we'll continue discussing this in many subsequent working group meetings. So let's move on to the next topic in this case, which is from Chris on the topic of backup and restore. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I brought this forward to the Google group and then on Slack as well. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to bring it up and just make sure that I'm not missing anything. So what we're trying to do is for all of our products, we're trying to come up with a central backup and restore mechanism that everybody follows. And so a lot of our products have kind of followed their own mechanism to do that. And so there's a set of products out there that can capture the steady state. So forgetting that Kube is always changing stuff and things are in flight all the time, let's assume that somehow we scaled things down and Kube was kind of in a steady state at a moment in time. You can use a product like Valero to be able to capture the state of all the Kube resources and even scope them by namespace and label and that sort of thing, and then be able to reconstitute that, assuming the declarative nature of how Kube resources are defined. So, and we've got that working for most of our workloads directly. So the CRs and the operands and that sort of thing. And it also does things like has this thing called Rustic in it, and it does persistent volume claim data and that kind of stuff too. So that aside, so what we're wanting to do is trying to figure out what the right way to restore the operator instances that are OLM managed. And so we of course tried first using Valero to do this, and it fails because the CSVs can't be rebound properly to the subscription and the install plans. I mean, there's some nuances that don't work quite right in there unless you back up the entire cluster, and we want to be able to back up namespace by namespace. And so, and there's some things like in the CSV, it can't quite follow all of the owner references because it's not OLM aware. So it doesn't know, for example, the CSV has cluster permissions, and it needs to go searching for those cluster roles and cluster role bindings and things like that. So we kind of put that on the shelf, thinking that's probably not going to work. And so then we decided, okay, let's look at how can we capture just the operator state through the subscription. And so what we're doing now is we're taking just a backup of the subscription. So what we're doing is we're taking we're looking at all the subscriptions we want to back up, finding the catalog sources that are bound to those subscriptions, locating the specific digest that's being used for those catalog sources, and backing those up. So we back up the digest for the catalog source, the subscription, and we sanitize the subscription so it doesn't have the install plans attached to it anymore. And then when we restore that catalog source that's now pinned to that catalog instance, that specific image. We restore the subscriptions pointing to that catalog, and we do some hackery to pause OLM while those subscriptions are being deployed, just in case there's that window where OLM wakes up and sees it needs to resolve something, and we don't get duplicate subscriptions. So I'm wondering, have you guys thought about backup and restore for operators? And I realize this new API is going to be much more declarative and will support a Valero style backup much better. And I'm going to definitely have that lens on it as I'm reviewing all that. But for the state of OLM as it is today, do you guys have any recommendations on what we should be doing for backup and restore? If we wanted to focus on own namespace, operator groups, and single namespace design.
I guess one quick question I had, Chris, is do you guys back up the operator group as well?
Yes, we do. So when we restore, first thing we do is we create the namespace, we restore the operator group, and then the catalog source is catalog sources, the pinned ones, and then the subscriptions. So is that the right way to do it? I'm also thinking from a GitOps perspective, how would one use GitOps to do this kind of thing too? You know, it's a similar kind of thing. Rather than backing up and restoring, you're kind of restoring from Git, you know, whatever your state would be.
Sorry, maybe I'm trying to follow, because when we're talking about backup, like my first imagination is, why aren't we just, and maybe this is a dumb question, but is there a reason why it's not just let's back up at CD and restore everything about the cluster? Like when you say backup, are you really just saying we want to, for any arbitrary cluster, apply the current state of what's been installed with OLM?
Yeah, so think of this as a multi-tenant cluster, right? So tenants, for example, might want to back up just their namespaces at specific points in time. So we're trying to do it from the kube client perspective rather than a back-end holistic perspective. Yeah, certainly one could do etcd, but then you still have the problem of all of the data. That's not an etcd.
Well, etcd changes during the backup too. I'm not sure if there's a way of snapshotting that.
Yeah, that's fair. I just like even putting the question of like mechanics of backing up a Kubernetes cluster aside for just a second. Like, I guess I'm just like the reason I'm asking is I'm just trying to understand, is the goal to, given the install state of all the stuff you've installed with OLM, reinstall all of those operators onto a cluster that's not aware of any of those OLM resources? Like in the context of, is it in the context of a namespace? Is it in context, I think you're saying it's not in the context of an entire cluster. So I think the reason I'm saying, we talked a little bit about this on Slack earlier, but I think any attempt to do stuff like forcefully reapply the CSVs and the install plans is going to be problematic, because you're going to end up fighting with some of the existing OLM controllers, right? Like if you apply the subscription and then you apply a CSV as well, OLM is going to try to do some resolution and install something. And depending on the order that those resources get applied, you might not end up in the same state you're in before. You might end up in a conflicting state. So
yeah, it kind of sounds like what you really want to be doing is not actually backing up the operator or anything to do with the operator itself, but backing up all the CRs and workload data and whatnot. And then you just reinstall the operators as you normally would on like a new cluster or whatever, or wherever you're trying to restore to. And then recreate those CRs from backups and add any data that you backed up as well.
Yeah,
But you
that's
should
essentially what we're doing, right? By essentially backing up just the subscriptions and the catalog source, we've essentially done that by restoring those subscriptions. We're essentially reinstalling those operators with exactly those versions that we're looking for. So reconstituting and start at that state.
So you're, by saying backup subscriptions and catalog sources, you're just saying you recreate the catalog source and subscription from.
Yeah, well, you can say we're exporting the subscription state, if you want to call it that. I mean, we have to know when we do a backup, we have to know what versions of the operators and what operators were actually installed, right? So the subscriptions are kind of the way to do that.
I'm curious, maybe this isn't a case that can happen, but I'm thinking through like the subscription backup and sanitizing it. Is there a case where maybe the subscription hasn't been fully, like we're not at the head of a channel and maybe we have a manual approval, or maybe it's an automatic approval, but for whatever reason, like we haven't yet installed the latest thing. Is there a case where like taking a backup of the subscription, sanitizing it, and then reapplying it would result in a different version getting installed because the new subscription is just going to say, I'm going to install the head of the channel?
You're absolutely right. That is an edge
Yes.
case.
Yeah, so backup the subscription and backup the catalog source doesn't guarantee the outcome of the new installation will be the same, because there's certain operator that already been installed and you can no longer reinstall them anymore. They're just there because they only existed, and they will be there until someone remove them, of course, but you will not be able to reinstall them anymore because that version, for example, is no longer available in the catalog source anymore. So that is an edge case for sure. And also dependency resolution can work out differently when there's certain, catalog source being available, certain, operator having different, dependency into it. I mean, you depend on certain operator that may not be available anymore, or they having a newer version that the OLM may pick up instead of the older version and so on. So there's possibility of variety or variant of installation that happen again when you recreate the subscription as well.
Well, that's why I wanted to pin the, grab the current catalog source images, to at least get the best case, try to capture that as best as I can. So I do understand there's definitely a possibility where we're in the middle of doing an upgrade, or OLM is trying to do, is trying to resolve things, and things kind of are in the middle of failing or whatever. And so I understand that's a gap. But what other alternatives do I have?
I think one idea is there's also the operator objects associated with each operator installation. Those are really meant to be like sort of purely informative, but it could be interesting if you included that in the backup as well, because that gives you a very clear picture of what actually was associated with every operator on the cluster at a point in time. So that can give you more confidence when you restore that things look.
But that's read only though, right? Right now.
Right. Yes. I'm. If you can't necessarily apply them as such, but it could be sort of a way to if you back those up and then you go through that subscription catalog sort of recreation step, and then you look at the operator, you can. I think it gives you some more ability to introspect what's going on in the cluster versus now versus in the past potentially.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I mean, there's another option here that's going to be a bit more manual, if that's what you prefer. Is the fact that you can actually get the content, essentially the bundle manifest that have been installed on the cluster via the install plan and its companion that where we storing all of the manifest that been applied to the cluster for that specific version of the operator. And then you can obviously get the YAML, in this case, JSON object, and then reapply them directly to the cluster and basically recreate the operator using that way as well. That what you
Yeah,
refer.
but what I
that
want,
obviously could be a manual.
yeah, but won't that break the subscription? Then a subscription's kind of dead at that point. It's like I could grab the CSVs and just restore the CSVs and get that state as well, right?
Yeah, but again, the subscription is a way to install operator, but it's actually more meaning in terms of upgrade. So that's depending on what you planning to do for the
Well, I
upgrade
want
in the
to, so
future.
here's my goal. So I want to take a snapshot of a cluster, or at least a subset of a cluster, kill my cluster, bring the cluster back, restore it, and be in exactly the same state I was, right? All my subscriptions are reactivated, and I can continue doing upgrades as if the cluster never went down, right? So disaster recovery, right? So that's what I'm trying to get to.
So it sounds like it's actually not that difficult to get the information you need to restore the operators themselves. You just need the operator version, right? Is there anything else to restore the actual operator that you need? You can just create a subscription with manual approval at that version and just turn off upgrades the channel head. That sounds
You
like
wouldn't necessarily even have. It seems like the only thing maybe that's missing in that case is you'd sanitize this subscription, but then on reinstall after you're restoring it, you would need to set starting CSV on the subscription based on the version that you found when you were taking the backup. Because you don't necessarily, it sounds like, Chris, you don't necessarily care, like if there are upgrades available and the original subscriptions was set to automatic approval, great, like we'll automatically approve them on restore. But what you need to make sure is that when you restore, you're restoring to the same version that was there before, because there might be upgrades in the chain that need to do migrations or have conversion webhooks or whatever it is, such that you have to traverse those things for the state of the CRs to be valid.
Right. Yes, I want that state to be restored at least for a moment in time until an operator or a human being has a chance to turn on automatic again later, right? Or update the catalog source to activate any newer versions that might become available. Now, those things you talked about of restoring the subscriptions and manual, those don't work either, because we're finding problems where the install plans all of a sudden get generated. They get generated with the wrong subscription ID, or not it's install plans. I'm just showing all sorts of little weird edge cases in there.
Are you backing up the two?
Can you repeat that?
Are you backing up the install plans too?
No, we tried that.
Okay.
That doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like. Well, I mean, the only things that you should need are a catalog source and subscription, and then everything should work, because that's how you install the operator in the first place, right?
Yeah, except you have to pause OLM. So you have to create there's two ways to pause OLM. You either have to scale it down, or you have to create a broken subscription there to pause the SAT solver, and then restore all your subscriptions, and then flip it on to avoid OLM trying to recreate the subscriptions that you're going to also create the dependencies for. Because you might have a bunch of subscriptions you're backing up and restoring that were auto created by dependency manager. Know what I mean?
I'm definitely clear on
Oh,
what
you are saying,
that is. I don't really know what you're talking about. Can somebody
okay,
clarify?
so I think I understand what Chris is saying. So you're saying that there's subscription for a dependent operator as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
If that is the case, then even though I said earlier on that dependency region can resolve into a different set of dependent operator, if something changing on a catalog source, but it's most of the time it's unlikely. Potentially, maybe a newer version of the same dependent operator is the most likely outcome, but it doesn't happen that often. So technically speaking, you can just get a list, you back up a list of subscription and determine in some way to see which is the main operator, which is dependent operator, and you technically can only need to recreate the main subscription, and OM will take care of the dependent one for you.
Yeah, but now I have to walk all the subscriptions to figure out what the heads are. You know, right? The roots of the entire graph. So I have to have graph logic now. So I just
Yeah,
want to
I'm
I just want to blindly grab all the subscriptions and reapply them back, right? Because that's obviously that is the whole dependency graph right there. So I just want to pause OLM saying, don't screw around with dependencies right now. I'm going to solve those for you, and then go ahead and flip it on. And when the dependency manager kicks in and say, oh, those subscriptions are already there, the packages are there, so I don't have to reinstall them. I won't auto create new subscriptions. I'll just use the ones you've got there.
So I think I'm following, and I'm not clear on what the problem is with just doing that, right? Grab all your subscriptions, grab your catalog sources, put them in a new namespace. You don't have to touch OLM. You'll just do manual approval subscriptions. You don't have to worry about the resolver creating anything because it's just going to create an install plan for you, and it's not going to be approved.
But the install plan that it creates might have a plan that'll create new CSVs or create new subscriptions, which will conflict with other ones that are there. There's a window. And so the install, even if I create them in manual, the install plans are still created. So I have to delete the install plans, and I can't delete the install plans because those are single use things. So I have to delete the subscriptions to regenerate the install plans.
You can just wait until the newest install plan has been generated, and you can tell with the new, you can wait until all of the subscriptions that you applied agree on what the current install plan generation is. And that means that they'll all have been input into the new generation, and then whatever install plan matches that should have only those subscriptions as input.
So essentially what Evan's saying, that you're installing one by one and waiting for the outcome before you installing the next one. Because if the next one you're going to install already exists, then you can skip it and installing the next one.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, I would have to have logic in there that says prior to installing or prior to applying this subscription, check to see if any other subscriptions exist with that package in them. If they do, skip it.
Yeah, that's correct. In the same namespace, of course.
Right.
Well, okay, so I guess that's a separate case, right? If you're trying to restore this over top of some namespace that already has other stuff in it, I think the best you can do is, I guess my point is, you shouldn't have to worry about any of this ordering stuff or figuring out when to do different things, because if you just hand it all to OLM and you wait until you've gotten confirmation that OLM has seen all of it, and you can tell that from the install plan generation, then OLM will tell you what the right set of things is, which if it's a fresh namespace, fresh cluster, will just be the stuff that you restored. If it's not a fresh namespace and it's not a clean cluster, then it could be different or could be errors. You can have conflicts with other stuff in the cluster. I guess my question is, if that doesn't work, I think that there's a fairly serious bug.
Okay, it doesn't work. I'll have to dive into. So I just need to decide, should I dive into that particular pattern or should I go with my other pattern, which I know does work, except there's those edge cases where the subscriptions might be kind of like in process when I backed them up. Yeah, then I guess the relationship between the install plan and the subscription is a little fuzzy to me, and so I have to experiment with it to see exactly what's going on. And I've tried a whole bunch of different things, but the only one reliable that I could get was just the scenario I've been talking about, which unfortunately has a little bit of hackery in it, to pause OLM. Yeah, I'm still not completely understanding what you're getting at, but so I think that the takeaway I have is that this isn't really supported, right? No one's really thought about doing this. And we probably need to write a white paper when we're done. So other people can figure out how to do this. Is that accurate?
Well, this is basically just a feature that we lost due to a security review a few years ago. You know, the CSV used to trigger the creation of this service account and all of its related resources, which meant that the way to back up and restore or to take a snapshot is you copy all the CSVs and you move them over, and all the CRDs they reference, which is like a fairly straightforward process. We had to stop making the CSVs create the RBAC resources directly. But I think this is where we got to on Slack too. I just skimmed the thread in the background. I'm not sure, might have missed something important, but I think once we have some of the newer APIs, you kind of get this for free because we're moving back to a world where these things are declarative and we are avoiding the original security issues via approval workflows that are configurable.
Okay, yep, all right. So I think you're confirming what I'm talking about.
I completely agree that backing up the subscriptions should not be the only option you have, if that's what and that's what you're getting at.
I mean, we kind of have the same problem in GitOps world, right? So in GitOps world, if you wanted to be able to promote from environment to environment to environment to have exactly the same state, it's hard to do, right? Because the subscriptions by nature are not an exact state. And so your inclination says, oh, I'll just restore the CSVs then. Well, you can't do that really either because of these things you're talking about. You have to restore more than that. So have you guys thought about the GitOps? I know I saw some Google group things talking about some threads talking about Argo and people talking about the install plan. Of course, the install plan is kind of a random identifier and you can't really do it that way. So has there been any thought on the GitOps, how you would enable this for GitOps? Because we're trying to get this working in our as a service environments too. All right, so how do we surface products for customers using OLM and OpenShift as our backend services? And so we'd really love to use GitOps to make that happen. And we're struggling with this other than, what I talked about, basically the subscriptions are the things that you apply, right, consistently. And then we would also have to apply the catalog sources, specific versions of those, just to make sure we get the right ones. There's still no absolute guarantee you're gonna get the exact same CSV, but you probably are, right? So as long as everything's created equal and no bugs. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think on the topic of GitOps, recently we tried to implement a GitOps-like feature in OLM around deletion of operands when you delete the associated operator.
Yep.
And we ran into some problems around basically due to the transient and multi-tenant nature of CSVs, it became very difficult to safely do a GitOps style deletion of the operator and operands. Like for example, I don't know, if you remove a file from the repository and then push that change, trigger a deletion. So, right, as Kevin is saying, I think the GitOps style workflow is naturally really popular and is really good. But some of the things that OLM does make it very difficult to do that sort of flow. And I mean, that's sort of what you're experiencing. So I just wanted to relay that we hit that case ourselves recently.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Yeah, you're talking about cascade deletes and all that kind of stuff. Deletes are just generally hard. right, undeletes and or whatever. Yeah. Okay, I think you've given me more to think about, so this is good. I've got some more edge cases that I need to attack, and then I need to kind of decide which way do I want to go. If I want to start looking at what Evan was proposing, I need to grok that a little bit more. Okay, I think I've exhausted my topic. I guess John Hunkins, I think you had another topic on there you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're ready to move on. Yeah, so we have a PR out there, PR 2069 in the OLM project. And this is the PR that's for introducing the catalog system tests. And I'm trying to figure out what the next steps are here, because, you know, I think the only things that we have remaining are, you know, there was a couple of items like trying to remove things that are OP or that are downstream related, like there was a downstream version of OPM tool that we don't want to use in the upstream, which is fine. I can take that out. And then removing OC, because that tool actually isn't even used, so we can certainly remove that. Other than those two things, I don't really have any to-do items that I can see that need to be done. You know, I mean, there seemed to be some talk of taking what we provided and spinning it into its own repo, but that's not what we had originally talked about, you know, many months ago. I don't know when it was now. So you know, what I'm kind of hoping to do here is try to, you know, see what's left, and can we just put this into OLM, get it so that we can actually start building and start contributing actual test cases that deal with, you know, catalog system testing in general, because we've got a whole bunch of things that we thought that would be useful for being able to test for that. But we kind of need to put this one through in order to be able to move on with that to that step. So, so I guess the question is what's the next steps here?
Is anyone on the call? Has anyone reviewed that PR?
Yes, I've reviewed the PR. My review was basically relaying the thoughts of several members on the team as we discussed it internally. I think that the PR is an impressive chunk of work. It's also very complex in what it does. And I think, you know, other folks, you know, Kevin can speak more to this, but it seemed like we were interested in having this functionality, but potentially not in the, you know, core suite of OLM EDE tests for a variety of reasons.
Okay. So I guess then the question becomes, how does, you know, if you're going to place it into another repository, you know, does that mean that whatever repository you do stick it into, that, you know, how to gain access to all the right things to be able to do, you know, create whatever artifacts I suppose you could bring in, you know, OLM and operator registry and other things that if we need to have certain kinds of objects or whatever that are necessary. I guess I don't know what without having given a whole lot of thought about how to actually put this into yet another repository. I can't, I guess I don't know off the top of my head what kind of things I'd be missing or what kinds of things that would have to come along. But if we were to put it someplace else, one, where would we put it? I mean, is there a someone that can just create a repo and I can just drop stuff into that and iterate on it there? Or I guess, yeah, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
figure out what's the next steps here.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. This is something I was thinking about a little bit. And this is not something that I don't know if the whole group has agreed makes sense or whatever. My proposal is probably a little vague, and we probably need to work together to figure out some of the details. But essentially, I think this is like a really useful thing to do this sort of like integration testing with the set of components that are in the operator framework, right? And probably what would be better is, rather than just testing this against like latest master of OLM, actually be able to test it like in the context of like, we have some integration test suites. When you run a PR against the OLM repository, it should build latest master of OLM plus whatever the latest release of the operator registry and the latest release of the API is. And then do the same thing, but on the registry. And if we could do that, I think it probably makes it, yeah, Joe, I think that's fair, probably the operator SDK as well. If we can do that, what we probably want to do is we want to create a separate repository in the operator framework, specifically for ETE or integration test or whatever you want to call it, and find a way to sort of generically build, I don't know, a GitHub action that knows how to take these tests and run them in the context of build latest of whatever repo is running.
Yeah, well, because I think one of the things that we were thinking about was like trying to be able to target specific versions of known released products to be able to actually, like if you run a test on, run it with this version of OPM. Okay, now run it with this other version of OPM, and being able to, now whether you're running those same exact tests multiple times, like on every single version of OPM that you care to test for. I mean, I guess Chris might have a little bit of thoughts on what tooling. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, Chris, about in terms of, I know that there are tests that we wanted to have for, testing a whole bunch of different scenarios, like, what happens when you, migrate a CRD from one version to the next, and dealing with the stored versus served, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of tests. But I don't know if that means that we wanted to run all those tests as a, run them against a particular version of OPM, and then turn around and run it against another version of OPM, or is it just like whatever happens to be the latest version of OPM? I mean, I guess I don't know what the plan is there. And I think what you're driving at is more about, how do I get the latest release, get the binary that came off of whatever the latest release was. So when you do I think what I hear what you're saying is that you're trying to make it so that you can actually, when someone does a PR into, say, OLM or operator registry, somehow that goes and kicks off another build in this other repo that uses the artifacts of.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's generally, I think, well, so I think that the higher order, like, how do we test the relationship between all these different versions of the product and how they interrelate to each other and what's compatible, what's not compatible. I think that's maybe a separate topic, or at very least it's a topic that we can build off of on top of what this work is in the future. I think we've also talked a lot about like what is our version matrix of the things that interop well together. And I think as the product matures, we need to start thinking about what that looks like, and maybe publish something in official documentation that says like ±2 minor releases. I also think that kind of goes into the question of like how the release versions interact with one another, and whether or not we have like an API version that is the core thing that provides that kind of level of guarantee. But I don't know that we are totally there yet. So I guess what I'm saying is, in the short term, if the goal is provide more more guarantees around, I pushed this code will work against master of all the latest stuff. I think that's a good first start, I think. So that's why I kind of think, just to start, what we want to do is just, for an OLM PR, when you merge the OLM PR, it runs these tests against whatever you're merging, plus the latest release of the other existing repositories.
Would it make sense to start with like writing this framework that just accepts versions of things that we want to test together? And then at that point, it becomes a lot easier than to say, okay, we're going to plug this in to the OLM repo by saying we want to test OLM master with latest heads of, or with latest releases of the others. And when we run it against the registry repo, we'll test the registry master against the latest release of the others. Does it, I guess, like it seems like maybe the first step is just like, let's write the framework to generically take the versions that we care about.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that we create in the function that actually kicks off and like, here's how to build a particular catalog. You give it a bunch of parameters in terms of the kinds of environment you're trying to build a catalog against. So what version of OPM are you trying to use to actually build that catalog with? And so the idea is that you have a framework to be able to build the catalog with the right kind of tooling, so that way you can craft a test that actually uses that particular version of the catalog to make sure it does what it's supposed to do, right? And so, I guess my original thinking on this was that it was supposed to be, kind of like you build the tests or you build the catalogs. Maybe you do that as a one-off thing. Maybe so that way you don't have to create them every single time, or and then store them someplace. Or you could actually, because the way that it's actually written right now is that it actually builds it and then puts it into a temporary rebuild. So you're spinning up a repository to put all of the catalogs into. So so I guess that was how do I say this? I mean, I guess the way that we're doing this right now is mainly build for a particular release of a catalog with these kind of parameters, and then go run your test against those. And so that was the overall flow. So but from what I'm hearing, what you're saying is that you're looking for something that actually says, go get the latest version of whatever was just built and go pull that down and then go build them. So it's a slightly different scenario from what I think we were originally thinking, but yeah, I don't know. Just trying to figure out how to move forward here.
Yeah, so I think we're at time. I think we definitely need to help prioritize moving it forward. It sounds like we can certainly continue the conversation on Slack, but maybe one of the things we want to do is we do actually want to create a standalone repository, figure out the naming of it, and help, and maybe just put in the README like sort of more of what we're describing, which I think is more basically of a continuous integration type of flow, which what Kevin was describing, versus a like validate prior release, prior history, which is also useful, but it is, as you said, slightly different and potentially more along the lines of what you were originally describing. But I think that could be a first step, and certainly we'll give all the right folks the right permissions to do whatever they need to do in that repository. And we can continue this dialogue in every subsequent meeting to get to the point where everyone is using it and it's useful. I think that could be a resolution.
Okay. So is Slack the right place to have that conversation?
I think so. Yeah, for the most immediate feedback, I think Slack makes sense, and we can go from there. But I think there is a path, like I kind of suggested, like a way forward, and we can kind of. I think having it in a standalone repo will be great because it'll allow the test to stabilize and allow a lot faster iteration. So I think that could be the next step. And yeah, let's follow up on Slack some more and keep talking about this in the next subsequent meetings.
Okay. All right. I guess that'll be the plan. Thanks.
All right, great. I think with that, we are over. Thank you everyone for attending the working group meeting today, and we'll see everyone at Issue Triage next week. Bye, everyone.